Welcome to Whistler's Vital Signs, an initiative of the Community Foundation of Whistler that seeks to connect and engage our community as a means to gauge its overall vitality. Whistler's Vital Signs with your host, Kim Slater, starts now.
Today we will be speaking about truth and reconciliation. And before we get right into it, I wish to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lil'wat and Squamish nations. Much gratitude is owed to them for sharing their land, customs, and culture with all those who live and visit here. Today, our conversation focuses on truth and reconciliation, a process to promote healing in the wake of Canada's past and ongoing systems of cultural genocide, which have included colonialism, residential schools, the 60s scoop, and ongoing racism. And Truth and Reconciliation deals with the resulting trauma experienced by generations of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Given the very painful nature of this topic, I should warn that some listeners, particularly those who have been directly or indirectly affected, may find today's conversation triggering. Our format today is slightly different than usual. I'm joined today by two guests. The first is Linda Epp, who is a member of the Sechelt Nation and who is one of our presenters at the Vital Cafe on this topic. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
We also have Libby McKeever, who is the Vital Signs Coordinator. And I really am so glad you're both here today. We were all at the cafe, and so we get to really have a talk about what we experienced in that space and what we got to walk away from.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Linda, I also want to acknowledge the generous service work that you're doing for us today and for our listeners by enlightening us and sharing some uncomfortable truths. It must be really hard, and we know it's not owed, so we just really want to say that we're so thankful that you're here today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So why don't you begin? Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Linda Epp, and I'm a 60s scoop survivor. And for those that don't know, I was taken away, my twin sister and I were taken away and put in foster care as babies, and we were adopted out into a Canadian-German Mennonite family. So unfortunately, to this day, I still don't know who my real parents are. I'm still on that journey. But I reside in Whistler, and I am Sechelt Nation. I found that out actually in grade 12. That's when I got my status card, so that's how I found out what nation I was from. But I do a lot of advocacy work here in Whistler because I just found it very necessary for me to connect with my culture and bring awareness in this lovely resort that we live. So with that, I install red dresses around Whistler, which signifies an Indigenous woman or girl or two-spirited that has gone missing or has been murdered in Canada. And I thought that was very important for me to bring awareness in this lovely resort. Jamie Black first installed red dresses at the University of Winnipeg in 2011, so I thought it was a very powerful and impactful statement. So I wanted to install red dresses prior to the Whistler Sisters in Spirit Vigil that I organize, which happens every October 4th.
Which is another just a powerful moment, really, that brings people together, both settlers as well as Indigenous folks.
Yes, it's open to the public, and it's a day that it's a hard day, but it is a day of healing as well, and support for the families and all Indigenous people have been affected by missing and murdered women, girls, boys, men. So I do a lot of different public speaking, and I spoke at Capilano University. I'm on the board of directors there, and I spoke about reclaiming my heritage. So that was very powerful. I spoke at the 50th celebration, and I spoke in my nation, which is Sechelt. So it was it was called a homecoming, and I felt, wow, it was truly a homecoming for me because I spoke in my nation. So I do a lot of different. I just spoke recently as well at the Indigenous Women's Leadership Summit, and that was the topic is speaking the truth. So that was very powerful as well. So I just like to continue to bring awareness and do what I can.
And what has been the response when you've shared your story, when people have heard you speak the truth? What have you heard back from people who've had the privilege of hearing that?
Well, I think that speaking the truth, like it's hard for a lot of people to listen to, actually. they do respect me speaking the truth. And it's very powerful that I do. And it's very healing for me because of the past trauma and the hardships that have happened in my life. I think that every time I do speak the truth, then that is kind of a healing tool for me. Like I did a TED Talk as well, and the topic was called Breaking Convention. And that was one of the hardest speeches I've ever had to write. And so, again, speaking the truth and sharing my truth, I think that's more powerful, and for people to have, to be able to listen to that and accept that and open their ears,
It was something that I felt was so powerful about the Vital Cafe was how we gathered, and maybe Libby, you want to just share some of the details because you were involved in the planning of this. But it was this really powerful coming together and deep listening that happened.
Absolutely. And just to take a step back, how we came to having this Vital Cafe on Truth and Reconciliation, it bubbled to the surface, this particular topic, from the 2018 report. And so I reached out to Linda, who I knew was a local advocate here for Indigenous peoples, and we had a conversation early in the summer, and it became very apparent very quickly that this is a big subject. And so we had invited a group of people to sit on a panel and discuss their history, and they very graciously shared.
And these are representatives of both Squamish Nation
and Lil'wat. Yes, absolutely. So Lil'wat and Squamish Nation, and Linda was there as well. She co-presented with me, and
in the Longhouse.
In the Longhouse, because it was a perfect spot to be in this beautiful Longhouse at the Squamish Lil'wat Cultural Center. And yes, as you say, we was standing room only. We were overwhelmed with people thirsty for knowledge.
And you could hear a pin drop. I mean, after hearing the stories that were, they had common threads, but they were so different. What we heard of your experience, just the tiny bit we heard, and then also from Lil'wat's cultural chief. These were different fragments of this experience. And I looked around the room and you could just see people just taking this in. It's really quite heavy. And I felt there was something just really, really powerful in that.
I was extremely happy with how many people attended and how many people were really interested in this topic. And what is Whistler doing about truth and reconciliation, or what can we do? So I found it very powerful that there were so many attendees that were interested.
Yeah, and this was one of the questions, right? It was, I think we first of all, it kind of opened up the event and thinking about, what does truth and reconciliation mean to you, and what do you know? What you bring to answering that question, and I'd love to hear your answer, was different than, of course, what other folks in the room had to say. But let's start with you. What does truth and reconciliation mean to you?
It's so... I think it's going to mean something different for everybody. I have my own story, and getting back to the other Indigenous people that attended as well, we all have our own story, and truth and reconciliation might mean something different to each because of our path, but we can break it down and in reality, what is truth, right? And what does it mean to reconcile? And so it's I think it's now coming to the forefront. We have to speak the truth now. Canada's best kept secret. We have to start talking about it. What is the truth? What happened to the Indigenous people, and how can we move forward?
Libby, were there things that you heard when people were responding to that question at the cafe?
I think people were more than ready to listen, and they've been waiting for something like this, and it was a very inspiring, a learning experience for many people. And I think that's what came out of it, was for people to go away and be curious, to ask questions, to listen, to understand it's going to be painful, but we need to move forward together with this. And I heard a few of our First Nations participants saying, okay, we need to move past guilt. We need to move together in truth and work together as people.
Yeah, it definitely felt like there was, range of awareness the awareness of the crowd, from folks that were in some ways working around this issue, to others where I think that maybe they had just had very, very little knowledge of what truth and reconciliation even means. And we should say, this is a process that's happened in other countries, and it's, I think, part of what's really powerful about it is that it creates a forum for survivors to share their stories, but also for those who perpetrated the crimes. So there's something that also happens when everyone has to come forward and talk about their experiences. It's a real, potentially really a healing moment to have to look the people that you hurt in the eyes, and also to have exchanges so that there can be that shared understanding to be able to move forward. It's, for us to heal, instead of just kind of patch over our wounds, there has to be the kind of, I don't know what you call it, excavation almost, to get out the stuff that's still festering.
And just speaking, Kim, to that learning point, many people that came had not had any schooling or knowledge of really what happened. It was a bit of a shock. It was quite an emotional evening. And also I was delighted to hear one young parent say that her kids come home and tell her Indigenous stories, myths and legends that had been taught to them in school, and the kids are coming home and sharing with the parents, which is terrific. I'm also very happy to say that it's now very much part of the BC curriculum and has been for a couple of years now. So I think moving forward, we are definitely on the right track for education.
And I think that is that's the first step, is understanding what is the truth. What's the truth of the past that happened?
Absolutely.
And it's so important for people to educate themselves. And this knowledge is in schools, and children are finally learning about it. And I think in reality, they're going to be teaching their parents more.
You're right there. Absolutely. We learn a lot from our kids.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it was really Canada's dirty secret. There was zero acknowledgement of this when I went to school.
And people don't want to think about it. Don't want to. They have a hard time. They think that things took place hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Yes, it did, but it actually, bad things happened to me. I'm sitting right here, and there's bad things that have happened to every Indigenous person in Canada. Right? So we just have to understand that. And what is that truth?
Yeah, it's something that I've been so taken with, and we talked about this a little bit before our conversation, Linda, is the amount of grace, time and time again in talking with First Nations folks, including people who have shown me the scars that they received, the physical scars, which are, of course, doesn't even speak to the
emotional
trauma, internal scars. And still willing to share, still willing to, be with me, and with no seeming anger. And I'm always so surprised, because it seems like there should be this righteous anger that is, I'm always just so taken aback and moved by the amount of willingness to be so generous with these stories and to spend time.
So when I do the Whistler Sisters in Spirit Vigil, it's a very powerful day, and it's an emotional day. And when I practice my speech, I break down crying every time. There's actually, within my speech, I've incorporated an author, Lori Schenner. And Lori Schenner was the first police officer in the downtown East Side missing and murdered women investigation that led to Robert Pickton. And so Lori Schenner wrote a book called That Lonely Section of Hell. So while I was organizing this vigil, I saw Lori Schenner on APTN getting interviewed, and I thought, I'm going to order this book. So I ordered the book and went to Armchair to go pick it up and then started reading it. And then in the book, Lori wrote, it's a very powerful book, and it details, chronicles the investigation. And in the book, Lori, who is now Lorimer Schenner, wrote a letter to all the women. So I incorporated that in my speech, and it is so powerful, and I break down crying every time I read this letter. And I have to say it, and I have to read this in front of everybody on the day of the vigil, October 4th. So I do what I have to do, break down, even write while I'm practicing the speech, but right before, but I hold it together when I'm actually standing there speaking in front of the public, in front of Indigenous people, because, I ask for like my ancestors to surround me and to give me some strength, because it's important words and it's an important event. So I think it's very powerful. Indigenous people, we are resilient. We do ask the Creator, and we ask for guidance and help, and love to surround us, and for our ancestors to be there. So I think that is pretty powerful.
So what can settlers do to support, contribute to, create space for that experience to happen in a healing way?
That's a great question. I think that, again, getting back to educating themselves, attending an event, like talk to Indigenous people, open up your heart, understand that they're human, and understand that the trauma that they've gone through. Go to the Squamish-Lil'wat Cultural Center. I think that, all of those are very important things to do, and I host the Indigenous portion of the Whistler Film Festival, which just happened. So I host the Indigenous Filmmaker Fellowship, and I find it so amazing and powerful that the Indigenous people are now creating more of a voice and wanting to be heard and sharing their stories. So there's a lot of amazing movies that are already out there, like Indian Horse is very powerful, which played here, and people couldn't, it was full every time, and they had to get more screenings actually of Indian Horse. And even The Grizzlies, which is another film that was played that focuses on the Inuit people. But I think that attending an event, going to watch movies, just educating yourself, and just really understanding that all Indigenous people are not the same either. People kind of classify them all as in one group, but we're very different. And even neighboring nations like Squamish and Lil'wat, and my nation, which neighbors Squamish, we're very distinct in who we are as people. Yeah, there's so much that you can do, but I think it's just, again, step one is just making sure that you understand what is the truth and what has happened with Indigenous people and in the past, and supporting moving forward.
So as a community, and talking about Whistler and the good things about this place, what are some of the ways that you see this community is doing a good job of honoring Indigenous peoples, or what other things could be done here that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the community is now becoming more aware and open, and like the Truth and Reconciliation Vital Cafe, like that's a step.
Step one.
It's a step forward, and having more. There's, of course, Lil'wat and Squamish representation at different events. That's very important. And the community, like we have an amazing community here. Yes, the Whistler Public Library, they're amazing. They support with hanging a red dress every year, but I have to give a big shout out as well to Arts Whistler.
Absolutely.
And their support year after year with what I do in my advocacy work, but also Levi's. He's an artist from Lil'wat Nation, and his artwork is on display right now at Moore-Young Arts Center.
Wonderful.
So, that's huge. That's amazing. Levi Nelson, he's a great young artist, and his work is unbelievable. But also the Whistler Film Festival and their Indigenous component, and what the Whistler Film Festival brings here to the community as well. And
Absolutely.
there's again, Indigenous people, we are here, we are strong, and we have a voice. Yeah. So it's just continuing on that path, and we keep going and persevering, but it's also, I challenge everybody to, educate themselves. Absolutely. And go attend an event, and go take a look at the lovely art at the Moore-Young Arts Center that's on display right now. Go see an Indigenous film.
attend a powwow.
Attend a powwow, yeah.
It's an open event, and of course, maybe you want to speak a bit to this sports, some of the sporting events, and the role of sports that.
Right, like when the Squamish-Lil'wat Cultural Center hosted the film The Grizzlies, and sports is integral to an Indigenous community because it gives the youth a sense of purpose and teamwork and belonging. So powerful film. So and there's the snowboard, the Indigenous
Right, we were talking
snowboarding
about the
team.
snowboard team.
Yeah, we were
Yes.
talking about that earlier today. Yeah.
Just speaking about voice, when you just mentioned in the film festival giving voice to Indigenous people, the Whistler Writers Festival for a number of years have introduced beautiful Indigenous authors, bringing them here and also into the schools. So,
Right.
and bringing Squamish, Pemberton, and Lil'wat in the new community, bringing everybody down here to experience Indigenous authors.
So I'm also the manager for Work BC for the Sea to Sky Corridor. So during the panel discussion, I actually had someone from my work as well attend and be on the panel because when I was going through the business plan of the Work BC business plan, and it's all very complicated, but there's two contract holders, so Open Door Group and Back in Motion. So I had a representative from Back in Motion come attend, and I wanted to chat about the inclusion of Indigenous people in the workplace.
Absolutely.
So myself being Indigenous, and then managing the Work BC for the Sea to Sky Corridor, so which is Squamish, Whistler, Pemberton, and Mount Currie, which is Lil'wat Nation. And the Sea to Sky is also my nation, which is Seychelles. But I think it's important for businesses and to include or incorporate inclusion groups such as Indigenous people in their business plan. You know, it's Whistler. We have a beautiful resort here. I think trying to understand what the challenges are as well for Indigenous people perhaps in the workforce, but even just getting to work is a challenge in the Sea to Sky Corridor for people from Lil'wat Nation and Mount Currie. If they have a job opportunity in Whistler, it's very challenging for them to actually make it to work. So there's a constant struggle. Let's try to find out how we can help, maybe
Facilitate that.
Yeah, exactly. There's people hitchhike. Indigenous people hitchhike a lot because of the lack of transportation. So it's understanding that even though this is like 2019, we're going into the year 2020, Indigenous communities struggle a lot. Like we live in this beautiful resort, but just north of here, some people don't have cell phone reception, There's a lot of Indigenous communities in Canada that don't even have drinkable water. Like these are necessities to live, and the struggles that still persist and go on today. We have to open up our eyes, and we have to, as a group, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? We have to have a voice. We have to talk to our government. We actually have to keep going and pushing for equality. But it's up to a lot of other people understand what the hardships are and what the struggles that Indigenous people have, because they are real.
Yeah, it was one of the big takeaways for me from the Vital Cafe was this, and I think it was your words, is the importance of bearing witness. So, what the thing that settlers can do is, upon hearing these stories that have been so graciously shared, it's then us do the work of taking those forward and sharing those, and that they don't just kind of stop. It's not just a blip on the radar. It's something that we have to carry with us and do what we can. The calls to action, the 94 calls to action that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the details, it's profound because it cuts across. It's what businesses can do, what institutions can do, what legal folks can do, and there's just lots of opportunities. I think it's Murray Stewart. I can't recall the fellow who was the chair of that report, but I do remember him saying in a presentation that he gave about it, which ones should you do? Whatever you can. Those who can should.
Exactly.
I think just the real impact for me from the cafe, just to go back to that, was don't make assumptions. Listen to the stories. It may be hard to hear. Ask questions. Be curious. And we move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Linda, what was your big takeaway? Let you have the last moment here.
Well, I'm just really, I'm grateful for this, for honestly having approached me. You know,
you're
I do
very
the work
welcome.
that I do because it's a passion of mine. But it's again, thank you for allowing me to let's talk about what is Whistler doing about truth and reconciliation. You know, I think that us as a community and as a group, us amazing Whistler people, I think we need to open up our eyes and we have to have these hard discussions and keep talking about it and let's do something about it. What are we going to do? You know, we are on unceded territory of Squamish Lillooet. Everywhere in Canada is Indigenous community and Indigenous land. So, I think that we just need to understand what the truth is and how we're going to move forward together in, as humans, in humanity. And let's hold on to the culture because it's so rich. Yeah. Let's keep going.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm going to teach you something. Put your hand to your heart and open it up. Open up your hands. Say Haishka.
Haishka.
Hosium.
Hosium.
Thank you in the Coast Salish language.
And like all good things, this edition of Whistler's Vital Signs has come to an end. Please be sure to turn on your notifications and join us for our next installment. Whistler's Vital Signs is a podcast series developed to help distribute the facts and findings as contained in the annual Vital Signs Whistler Report and related programs. For more information on Whistler's Vital Signs, please visit the Community Foundation of Whistler online at whistlerfoundation.com. Whistler's Vital Signs podcasts are brought to you by the Vancouver Foundation, the Community Foundation of Whistler, and 101.5 Whistler FM.